Welcome to another practice exam video. I'm James and I create CompTIA practice exams and show you the process I teach others on how to solve each question in real time. Today's video is going to be 30 questions for the CompTIA Cybersecurity Analyst Plus, also known as the CySA Plus exam. And although I will provide explanations for each correct and incorrect answer, I challenge you to pause the video to try and answer for yourself. I have a feeling you'll do much better than you think. All right, let's go ahead and jump into question one. All right, question one. A user account logs into systems from two countries 5 minutes apart. The user is confirmed to be in one location and not using a VPN. What is the most likely explanation? A, impossible travel. B, privilege escalation. C, account spoofing. Or D, beaconing. All right, so the key phrase here, without a doubt, will be from two countries 5 minutes apart. This indicates some sort of like geographical login origin issues, which definitely raises red flags about the legitimacy of the access. So let's go ahead and do the process of elimination now. We can first eliminate B, privilege escalation. And this is when a user gains higher privileges than intended, typically by exploiting a vulnerability. Now, it's dangerous, but it doesn't explain logins from separate locations. Next, we can eliminate D, beaconing. And beaconing refers to regular communication from a compromised host to a command and control center. But this does not relate to any unusual login patterns across different locations. And finally, we can eliminate C, account spoofing. And this would, imply impersonating or faking account identity, which based on this scenario here, it does not look like that's happening at all. And that leaves us with A, impossible travel, which this refers to logins that occur from like geographically distant locations in a time frame that would be physically impossible for a legitimate user to achieve. Question 2. During a routine internal scan, a security analyst notices that multiple servers are missing recent patches and are running outdated software versions known to have public exploits. Which of the following should the analyst do next? A, prioritize the assets based on risk. B, reboot the systems to reset vulnerabilities. C, block external access to the servers. Or D, submit a change request to decom the assets. All right, so the key phrase here is outdated software versions known to have public exploits. So let's go ahead and do the process of elimination now. And we can first eliminate B, reboot the systems to reset vulnerabilities. Now, rebooting a server won't fix a missing patch or any outdated software. So we can go ahead and rule this one out. Next, we can go ahead and remove C, block external access to the servers. Now that might sound like a decent, short-term mitigation here, but the scenario doesn't say these servers are exposed externally. So this wouldn't do anything. And finally, we can eliminate D, submit a change request to decommission the assets. That's a really drastic step here. Just because the systems are vulnerable doesn't mean they're no longer needed, and that's important to know. And that leaves us with A, prioritize the assets based on risk. It's important to evaluate which systems are most critical, most exposed, and most vulnerable. And then you would address those first. Question 3. After an employee unknowingly runs a malicious macro from a phishing email, EDR logs show a service account accessing systems outside its normal permissions. What is the most appropriate immediate response? A, disable outbound DNS traffic at the firewall. B, deploy deception hosts on the affected subnet. C, contain the compromised user and service accounts. Or D, perform root cause analysis and initiate legal hold. Okay, so the key phrase for this one is service account accessing systems outside the normal permissions. So let's go ahead and do the process of elimination. We can start by eliminating A, disable outbound DNS traffic at the firewall. Now that's a reactive like network layer control, which might help stop beaconing or external communication, but it doesn't stop what's already happening internally. Next, we can eliminate D, perform root cause analysis and initiate legal hold. Now at this stage, the attacker is still active and you don't start legal processes before a really important step that we'll get to in a second here. And finally, we can eliminate B, deploy deception hosts on the affected subnet. Now that might help in future attacks or in detecting lateral movement, but deploying honeypots isn't an immediate containment step during an active compromise. And that leaves us with C, contain the compromised user and service accounts. Now, containment stops the threat from spreading further and prevents, continued misuse of the stolen credentials. A scenario like this, all the other options either won't be effective or the pretty drastic measures. The first thing you need to do is contain the threat. Question 4. A vulnerability scan lists over 500 findings, but the security team has a limited staff and a strict SLA to meet. What should the team focus on first when reporting to stakeholders? A, risk score and prioritization. B, detailed descriptions of all vulnerabilities. C, correlating CVSS scores with exploit availability. And D, listing deprecated protocols across the environment. Okay, so the key phrase for this one is just simply reporting to stakeholders. Now it's important to know that when reporting to stakeholders, it's really important to explain the situation in very simple terms, not technical terms. They might not understand what you're talking about. And not only that, it's really important to only provide info that is relevant to the report. All right, anyway, let's go ahead and do the process of elimination here. We can start with B, detailed descriptions of all vulnerabilities. Now, this isn't realistic when you're dealing with 500 plus findings at a time. Also, stakeholders don't need to know every technical detail. Next, we can eliminate D, listing deprecated protocols across the environment. Now, this might be part of a broader technical review later, but it doesn't satisfy the actual reason for the report. And finally, we can eliminate C, correlating CVSS scores with exploit availability. Now, this is useful for analysts prioritizing what to patch, but it's not the best first step in stakeholder reporting. And that leaves us with A, risk score and prioritization. Now, this is important. This gives stakeholders a clear view of the most urgent issues that could have the greatest impact, which in return can help them make informed decisions on next steps. Question 5. A security analyst observes a sharp increase in traffic to an internal server over non-standard ports occurring at regular intervals and with identical packet sizes. What is the most likely explanation? A, scanning. B, exfiltration. C, beaconing. Or D, spoofing. All right, I would say there are 3 key phrases here. The first one is sharp increase in traffic. Second is non-standard ports. That's important. And third is regular intervals. All right, let's go ahead and start eliminating some incorrect answers here. And we can start with B, exfiltration. And exfiltration is the unauthorized transfer of data out of a network. While it may involve, non-standard ports, potentially, it doesn't usually follow a repetitive pattern with identical packet sizes. Next, we can eliminate D, spoofing. And in this context, it refers to forging packet headers or identities, such as faking an IP address or a MAC address. This is pretty unrelated to the scenario though. And finally, we can eliminate A, scanning. And this would typically involve, accessing a wide range of ports or hosts in a short time to discover vulnerabilities. Now, it's usually irregular, and the scenario states that this is occurring over non-standard ports. If it was scanning, it would also be the first 1,000 ports, which are the common ports. And that leaves us with C, beaconing. And this is a common characteristic of malware that establishes command and control communication. It usually occurs at regular intervals over non-standard ports usually, and with very similar packet sizes. Question 6. A security analyst uses a network scanning tool to gather information from a device about its services, protocols, and behavior in order to determine its role on the network. What technique is the analyst applying? A, enumeration, B, asset discovery, C, data enrichment, or D, service scanning? I would say this is kind of an easy question, but the key phrase here would be gather information from a device. So let's go ahead and do the process of elimination now. And we can start with C, data enrichment. Now, this typically refers to enhancing log or event data by combining it with additional context, like things like threat intel feeds. Next, we can eliminate D, service scanning. And service scanning is focused specifically on identifying open ports and running services on a system. It's a part of scanning, but doesn't necessarily determine a device's role on the network. And finally, we can eliminate A, enumeration. And enumeration is usually associated with deeper probing, like polling user accounts, shares, or something like an SNMP value after initial discovery. So it's a little too advanced for this. And that leaves us with B, asset discovery. And asset discovery involves identifying and classifying devices on a network, typically by analyzing their responses to things like scanning tools. Question 7. Security analysts research advanced persistent threats in order to better understand how adversaries operate and to improve detection and response strategies. What are they primarily trying to classify? A, TTPs, B, OSINT, C, CVEs, or D, CWEs? All right, so the key phrase here is how adversaries operate. And if you know acronyms, this is a pretty easy one. And please, 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 if you plan on sitting for this exam, or any CompTIA exam that is, you have to learn the acronyms. So let's go ahead and do the process of elimination. We can first eliminate B, OSINT. That stands for Open Source Intelligence. And OSINT is all about collecting publicly available data from things like social media, blogs, forums, etc. And it supports the research for this scenario, but it's not the output, technically. Next, we can eliminate C, CVEs. And this stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures, which is specific flaws in software and hardware. And finally, we can eliminate D, CWE. This stands for Common Weakness Enumeration. And this refers to categories of software flaws, such as things like, let's say, buffer overflows or improper access control. And that leaves us with A, TTPs, which stands for Tactics, Techniques, and Procedures. And this is the standardized way security professionals describe and classify adversary behavior. It describes things like how they can access, move laterally, persist, and even exfiltrate data. Question 8. An organization implements a business continuity strategy to address disruptions such as cyber attacks or infrastructure failures. What is the primary goal of this strategy? A, maintaining operations when an incident occurs. B, meeting RPOs, C, restoring operations when an incident occurs, or D, meeting RTOs. All right, so the key phrase for this one is going to be disruptions such as cyber attacks or infrastructure failures. So let's go ahead and do the process of elimination now. And we'll start off by eliminating D, meeting RTOs. Now, RTO stands for recovery time objective, and this defines how quickly systems should be restored after a disruption. Now, this is a recovery concept, not the goal for business continuity. Next, we can eliminate B, meeting RPOs. And RPO is recovery point objective, and this deals with how much data loss is acceptable. Finally, we can eliminate C, restoring operations when an incident occurs. Now, this is the definition of a disaster recovery, not business continuity. And that leaves us with A, maintaining operations when an incident occurs. Now, business continuity is all about sustaining critical functions without interruption, even during events like cyber attacks or even something like system outages. Question 9. During a threat modeling session, a security engineer outlines all devices, applications, users, and infrastructure that could be targeted by an attacker. What is the engineer documenting? A, attack vector, B, misconfigurations, C, security controls, or D, attack surface. All right, so the key phrases for this one, I would say there are two. The first one's going to be devices, applications, users, and infrastructure. And the second is going to be could be targeted by an attacker. All right, so let's go ahead and start off the process of elimination now. And we can first eliminate B, misconfigurations. Now, these are specific types of vulnerabilities. It's important to know for this question that the engineer is documenting potential targets, not weaknesses. Next, we can eliminate C, security controls. Now, these are defenses such as things like firewalls or even encryption, not targets. And finally, we can eliminate A, attack vector. Now, an attack vector refers to the method an attacker uses to exploit a vulnerability. And that leaves us with D, attack surface. The attack surface is the total set of, let's say, points where an attacker could attempt to enter or affect a system, as an example. Question 10. A database server has a high severity vulnerability, but due to a required 3-week patch approval process, a security analyst implements a firewall rules to reduce the risk of exploitation in the meantime. What does the firewall represent in this scenario? A, indicator of compromise. B, compensating control. C, mitigation. Or D, technical control. All right, so this one is designed to be tricky, by the way. Technically, 3 of the 4 possible answers could be correct, but there's one better answer. So without a doubt, the most important key phrase is actually the question itself. It's important, so I want to highlight it, and that is, what does the firewall represent in this scenario? All right, so let's go ahead and go through the process of elimination now. And we can first eliminate A, indicator of compromise. An IOC is evidence that an attack or breach has occurred, such as unusual outbound traffic, malware signatures, or login attempts. A firewall rule designed to reduce risk doesn't indicate that an attack has happened, so this doesn't apply. Next, we can eliminate D, technical control. Now, yes, a firewall is technically a technical control, but remember, the question is asking what role is the firewall playing in this specific context. Now, just calling it a technical control misses the key point. The that it's being used in place of a vulnerability. And finally, we can eliminate C, mitigation. Now, this is a general term for reducing risk. In this case, the firewall rule is specifically substituting, for control, which is patching, that can't be implemented yet. So based on the wording of the question, B, compensating control is the better fit. Now, this is a temporary or alternative security measure used when the primary control, which in this case is patching, cannot be immediately implemented. I want to point out that you'll get a lot of questions like this where it's super important to read what is actually being asked in the question, because compensating control, mitigation, and technical control, those can all apply to firewall rules. But the question is asking, what does the firewall represent in this scenario? And real quick, if you're enjoying these practice exam videos and want to challenge yourself further, I do have a 270 question exam course that just went live on Udemy for the CySA Plus exam. Each question is within the exam objectives, and yes, there's a separate section just for logs because you will have questions on logs. Also, I want to add, never buy my or any Udemy course for full price. You can always just check the pinned comment below this video for the latest deals I have going. All right, let's go ahead and get back to the exam. Question 11. After detecting unauthorized access to a sensitive HR system, the incident response team isolates the affected host and resets the compromised credentials. They now begin reviewing logs and capture data to determine how the breach occurred. Which phase of the incident response are they performing? A, eradication, B, containment, C, detection, or D, analysis. Okay, so the key phrase in this question is reviewing logs and captured data. And I would also say another good one is determine how the breach occurred, all right? So let's go into the process of elimination. We can start by eliminating A, eradication. Now, eradication is all about removing the threat, like deleting malware as an example. In this scenario, they've already isolated the host and reset credentials. Now it's about understanding what happened. Next, we can eliminate B, containment. And that's the phase where you limit the damage essentially, like isolating systems or changing passwords. Now, the scenario explicitly says that this has already occurred, so it's safe to say we have moved past containment, unless we find something else that needs to be contained that we missed. Then we would go back to containment. And finally, we can eliminate C, detection. Now, detection involves identifying signs of an incident, like alerts or suspicious behavior. Now, this has already happened. And that leaves D, analysis. Now, this phase is focused on understanding the scope, the cause, and potentially even the impact of the incident. Now, we're back to analysis because we're reviewing logs and captured data to determine how the breach occurred. Question 12. A security analyst prepares a report for leadership after an incident involving unauthorized access to customer data. The report includes a timeline, how the breach occurred, impacted systems, and recommendations. Which type of report is the analyst creating? A, executive summary, B, compliance report, C, vulnerability scan, or D, SLA. All right, pretty easy one. I would say the best key phrase for this one is going to be report for leadership. So let's go ahead and do the process of elimination. We can first eliminate D, SLA, and SLA stands for Service Level Agreement, and this is a contract or agreement that defines performance expectations between providers and clients. This is not a response to a security event. Next, we can eliminate C, vulnerability scan. And this is just simply not a report type. It's a technical activity or tool that gives you output that identifies security weaknesses. It wouldn't contain a timeline or summarize anything for leadership. And finally, we can eliminate B, compliance report. And a compliance report is focused on whether the organization meets regulatory or policy requirements. It is not a report for leadership. And that leads us with A, executive summary. Now, executive summaries are created specifically for non-technical stakeholders and typically include high-level overviews of incidents, timelines, system impacts, and even recommendations. Question 13. A security analyst uses TCP dump to capture traffic from a suspected compromised endpoint. The analyst observes repeated connections to an unfamiliar IP address on port 4444 and identifies abnormal outbound packet patterns. What is the analyst most likely investigating? A, C2 activity, B, port scanning, C, vulnerability scanning, or D, log poisoning? All right, so the key phrases for this one is TCP dump and port 4444. I would say abnormal outbound packet patterns too. So we can go ahead and start off the process of elimination by first eliminating D, log poisoning. And this is when an attacker inserts malicious context, or content into logs to obscure their activity or manipulate systems that parse logs. Now this is a real thing, but it's actually not within the exam objectives. Next, we can eliminate C, vulnerability scanning. And this is a detection activity and it wouldn't involve consistent outbound connections to a single IP. And finally, we can eliminate B, port scanning. This is similar to why C is incorrect. This wouldn't look like outbound connections from a single host. And that leaves us with A, C2 activity. And C2 stands for command and control. And this is when communications between a compromised system and an attacker, attacker controlled server or infrastructure, they're communicating with each other. And this commonly happens actually on port 4444. Question 14. An application has a flaw that allows an attacker to perform an arithmetic operation that stores a value larger than the allocated buffer space. This results in the ability to execute arbitrary code on the system. What specific vulnerability does this represent? A, broken access control, B, integer overflow, C, input validation failure, or D, memory corruption. All right, the key phrase, I would say phrases for this one is going to be arithmetic operation and store a value larger than the allocated buffer space. So let's go ahead and do the process of elimination. And we can start by getting rid of A, broken access control. Now this refers to a user gaining access to resources they shouldn't have, like reading someone else's data or accessing admin functions as an example. In this case here, the attacker isn't bypassing permissions. Next, we can eliminate D, memory corruption. This one is tempting, but while the scenario can describe a memory corruption, that is just too vague when the question is asking for a specific vulnerability. And finally, we can eliminate C, input validation failure. Now, this one is also kind of tempting, but it's asking for a specific vulnerability. And simply put, integer overflow is a very specific vulnerability that describes this scenario perfectly, which B, integer overflow is the answer here. And this is where a numeric value exceeds storage space due to like an unchecked arithmetic operation, which is exactly what's happening. Question 15, halfway there. A security engineer needs to find an open source link analysis tool that includes a graphical user interface, also known as a GUI, to support staff during penetration tests. Which of the following should the analyst recommend? A, Nmap, B, Maltego, C, Burp Suite, or D, PackU? All right, so the key phrases for this one is open source link analysis tool. There are more, but this is probably the most important. So let's go into the process of elimination. And we can first start by eliminating A, Nmap. And Nmap is just a port scanner, and it's also command line based by default. Now, while there is a GUI version called ZenMap, the scenario is asking for a link analysis tool as well. Next, we can eliminate C, Burp Suite. And this is a web vulnerability scanner and proxy used for intercepting and manipulating HTTP or HTTPS traffic. And finally, we can eliminate D, PackU. And PackU is a cloud-focused penetration testing framework specifically designed to simulate attacks in AWS, Amazon Web Services environments. And that leaves us with B, Maltego. Maltego is an OSINT tool that has a GUI to visualize the links and also relationships between different domains, IPs, and even people. Question 16. A server administrator needs to modify a registry value related to scheduled tasks on Windows 11 computer. Where will this change most likely need to be made? A, HKLM, B, HKCR, C, HKU, or D, HKCC. All right, if you don't know anything about registry modification or anything like that, this is gonna be a tough one. Anyway, the key phrase for this one is scheduled tasks. Now, I do want to mention it's important to learn the different, registry hives in InfoSec, or even just in IT. If you're taking this career seriously, you're going to have to deal with it in one way or another. So let's go ahead and go through the process of elimination. We can first eliminate C, HKU, and that stands for HKey, like KEY users. This hive that holds specific profile settings for all users on the system. Now, scheduled tasks would not be stored there. This is more for individual user preferences. Next, we can eliminate D, HKCC, which stands for HKey current config. And this contains dynamic configuration data about the current hardware profile, such as things like display settings and printers, stuff along those sorts. And finally, we can eliminate B, HKCR, and that stands for HKey classes root. And this deals with file associations and class registrations, kind of like telling Windows what program should open something like a text or .txt file. And that leaves us with A, HKLM, and that stands for HKey local machine. And this stores settings and configurations that apply to the entire system, including services, drivers, and yes, scheduled tasks. Question 17. A security team is deciding how to assess organizational risk but lacks access to reliable financial impact data and detailed metrics. When are qualitative risk assessments typically preferred over quantitative ones? A, when numeric values are easy to calculate. B, when risk tolerance needs to be ranked. C, when conducting tabletop exercises. Or D, when numeric values are difficult to determine. All right, so the key phrase for this one is going to be lacks access to reliable financial impact data and detailed metrics. So let's go ahead and do the process of elimination. I do want to mention that the key to this one is to understand that the team does not have the concrete numbers that are needed for quantitative risk assessment, which is what is bringing up this scenario. Anyway, we can first eliminate C when conducting tabletop exercises. Now, tabletop exercises often use qualitative methods, but they're not exclusively tied to qualitative assessments. Next, we can eliminate B when risk tolerance needs to be ranked. Now, this one might sound good, but it's more of an outcome than like a trigger, if that makes sense. And finally, we can eliminate A, when numeric values are easy to calculate. Now, that's actually the ideal scenario for quantitative risk assessment, not like a qualitative one. If you have reliable data, you use it to produce more precise risk calculations using quantitative. And that leaves us with D, when numeric values are difficult to determine. Now, this is exactly why organizations turn to qualitative assessments. You know, when things like financial, statistical, or technical data, it just isn't available or even readable. Question 18. A risk manager is analyzing the severity of several risks facing the organization. What are the two primary factors that contribute to risk severity? Select all that apply. A, BIA, B, probability, C, impact, or D, asset value. All right, so the key phrase for this one is analyzing the severity of several risks. All right, I do want to point out this is a multiple select question, so there's two correct answers here. But anyway, let's go ahead and start eliminating. We can start with A, BIA, and that stands for Business Impact Analysis. Now, BIA is important in understanding recovery priorities. It is not one of the two core components of risk severity. Next, we can eliminate D, asset value. And asset value affects risk exposure. It may influence prioritization, but on its own, it doesn't define the severity of a risk. And that leaves us with B, probability, and C, impact. And probability is how likely it is that a given threat will exploit a vulnerability, and an impact refers to the potential damage. Question 19. A penetration tester is looking for a tool that can intercept and inspect web requests generated by a browser before those requests reach the network. Which of the following tools is best for this task? A, Zap, B, Wireshark, C, Metasploit, or D, Nessus. All right, so the key phrase for this one is intercept and inspect web requests. Now, only one of these tools are designed for this purpose. So let's go ahead and do the process elimination now. And we can first eliminate D, Nessus. And Nessus is a vulnerability scanner. It's ideal for identifying known flaws across systems, services, and softwares, but it doesn't serve as an HTTP or HTTPS like interception proxy. Next, we can eliminate B, Wireshark. And Wireshark is just a packet sniffer. And that means that it captures traffic after it hits the network. It can't intercept browser-generated requests before they leave the system. And finally, we can eliminate C, Metasploit. Now, Metasploit is a very good tool. It's a penetration like testing framework used primarily for exploitation and payload delivery, but not for intercepting or analyzing any web requests. And that leaves us with A, Zap. And Zap stands for Z Attack Proxy. Now, Zap is specifically used for intercepting, modifying, and even analyzing web traffic in real time. And side note, the way Zap works is it acts as like a man-in-the-middle attack. Question 20. A security engineer is attempting to analyze a binary file and needs to extract any readable text it may contain. Which tool would be most useful for this task? A, GDB, B, Wireshark, C, OpenVAS, or D, strings? All right, so another tool question. The key phrase for this one is analyze a binary file. So we can go ahead and start the process of elimination, and we'll first start with eliminating C, OpenVAS. And OpenVAS is a vulnerability scanner used for identifying known security weaknesses on systems and networks. It does not interact or analyze binary files. Next, we can eliminate B, Wireshark. And we had this one in the last question, but this is a packet capture tool, and it's used to inspect network traffic. And finally, we can eliminate A, GBD, or GDB, a little dyslexic there. That stands for GNU debugger or GNU debugger, however you want to say it. This is used for step-by-step debugging of things like applications, mostly those written in C or C++. Now, while technically it could assist with binary analysis, it's not what it's designed for, and that's not what CompTIA teaches you. And that leaves us with D, strings. And the strings command is used specifically to scan binary files and pull out things like human readable sequences of characters to make it easier to read. Question 21. A threat actor uses a URL shortening services to make a malicious link look harmless, then embeds the link in a legitimate looking email. What technique does this represent? A, obfuscated link. B, phishing. C, social engineering. Or D, encoded payload. All right, so I wanted to add this question because it's a perfect example of a CompTIA-like formatted question, right? There's gonna be multiple correct answers technically, but there's a key in this question that tells you the right answer. So let's look at the key phrases. The first one is embeds the link with a legitimate looking email. And more importantly, technique. That's super important. So let's go and go to the process of elimination. We can start with D, encoded payload. Now this refers to hiding malicious code using encoding like base64 as an example. Typically inside a script or a binary, but it's not to disguise a URL's appearance in any way. Next, we can eliminate B, phishing. Now, phishing is, definitely involved here, right? Sending a deceptive email to trick a user into clicking. However, the question doesn't ask for the broader category of an attack. It asks for the technique being used. And phishing is the delivery method, not the mechanism. And finally, we can eliminate C, social engineering. Again, technically valid, right? Tricking someone into clicking a disguised link is absolutely some sort of, in a way, social engineering. But like phishing, it's a high-level tactic, and the scenario here specifically, it zooms in on the actual trick, which is hiding the malicious destination. And that leaves us with A, obfuscated link. This is the best answer. It directly refers to the use of visual or technical methods, such as things like URL shortening. And if you don't know what that is, think of like bit.ly, right? To hide a link's true destination from the user. This is the technique that's being used, which is what the question was asking for. Question 22. A network security engineer wants to enable DMARC for an organization's domain. What must be configured first to properly support DMARC? A, HTTPS. B, SPF and CNAME. C, SPF and DKIM. Or D, HTTPS and MX. All right. So the key phrase for this one is enable DMARC, and I'd also say configured first. So let's go into the process of elimination. I do want to mention it's important to know that we're dealing with like email authentication protocols here. DMARC, that builds on other systems to help prevent spoofing and, phishing by enforcing domain level email policies. So we can first eliminate A, HTTPS. Now, HTTPS secures web traffic, not email communication. Next, we can eliminate B, SPF and CNAME. Now, SPF is relevant here, but CNAME records are used for like making DNS aliases, not validating email sources or the content. And finally, we can eliminate D, HTTPS and MX. Again, HTTPS is for web traffic, and MX, those records are necessary for email delivery in general, but they're not directly tied to DMARC. And that leaves us with C, SPF and DKIM. Now, SPF, which stands for Sender Policy Framework, now that verifies the emails coming from authorized mail servers. And DKIM, which is Domain Keys Identified Mail, that provides cryptographic verification that the message content hasn't been altered and is truly from the sender's domain. Question 23. A security team is working with limited resources and needs to improve the security of its APIs. Why should the team refer to the OWASP Top 10 API security risks? A, to prioritize remediation efforts. B, to identify phishing domains. C, to validate TLS certificates. Or D, to benchmark patching speeds. All right, so the key for this one is going to be limited resources. And we can start by eliminating B, to identify phishing domains. Now, phishing detection and things like domain reputation, they're both part of threat intelligence and email security, but not API security. Next, we can eliminate C, to validate TLS certificates. And TLS certificate validation is a technical process that is handled by browsers and APIs for securing communication. Now, it's important, but it's not the purpose of the OWASP Top 10 list. And finally, we can eliminate D, to benchmark patching speed. Now, patching metrics are part of vulnerability management programs, but the OWASP lists help identify what to patch or to fix, not how quickly your team does it, if that makes sense. So that leaves us with A, to prioritize remediation efforts. And the purpose of the OWASP list is to highlight the most common and dangerous vulnerabilities in specific areas, like APIs as an example, so that security teams can focus their efforts on addressing the highest risk issues first. Question 24. A threat actor is researching company executives to craft a targeted spear phishing email. This activity aligns with which stage of the cyber kill chain? A, C2, B, weaponization, C, delivery, or D, reconnaissance? All right, so the key phrase for this one regarding the cyber kill chain is going to be researching company executives. So let's go ahead and eliminate some options here. We can first eliminate A, C2, which mentioned before in a previous question there. That is command and control, and that refers to the stage where the attacker establishes communication with the compromised system. Now, there's no indication in this scenario that access has been granted or gained, or any communication channel has been set up. Next, we can eliminate B, weaponization. And weaponization, that involves creating the payload, such as crafting malware or embedding a malicious link or attachment. Now, in this case, the attacker hasn't created anything yet. And finally, we can eliminate C, delivery. And delivery is when the malicious content, like a phishing email or exploit, is sent to the target. Now, again, this hasn't happened yet. And that leaves us with D, reconnaissance. And this is the very first phase of the cyber kill chain. And it's where attackers gather intel on their targets, such as names, roles, email addresses, and sometimes even habits, right? And they do that to craft effective attacks. Question 25. To better understand a recent malware infection, a security analyst follows guidelines and attempts to reverse engineer the malware in a sandbox environment. This process is an example of what type of security control? A, detective, B, preventative, C, operational, or D, technical. All right, so the key phrase for this one is reverse engineer the malware. Also, it's important to understand that the scenario and the question is asking about the process that's happening, and that's pretty important. So let's go ahead and do the process of elimination. And we can start with A, detective. And detective controls identify and alert on incidences. Examples include things like IDSs, log monitoring, or SIM alerts. Now this has already occurred here. Next, we can eliminate B, preventative. And these controls aim to stop incidents from happening in the first place, right? So things like firewalls with firewall rules, or even MFA, so multi-factor authentication. But this activity that is occurring is reactive, right, and not preventative. And finally, we can eliminate D, technical. Now, while the sandbox tool that's being used is technical, the focus of the question is on the analyst action, not the tool itself. So it's crucial to understand how the question is laid out and what's actually being asked here. And that leaves us with C, operational. And operational controls are like people-driven actions or procedures like incident response, security awareness trainings, and even, in this case, reverse engineering. It mentions guidelines. And that's how you know this is part of an operational control. Question 26. Threat actors can abuse legitimate load testing services as part of an attack campaign targeting public-facing infrastructure. This technique is used to carry out what type of attack? A, data exfiltration. B, brute force. C, credential stuffing. Or D, DOS. All right, so the key phrase for this one, and it's a pretty easy one I would say, is abuse legitimate load testing services. So let's go ahead and move on to the process of elimination now. We can start with A, data exfiltration. Now this refers to unauthorized data transfer out of a network. It's usually stealthy and sometimes also involving compromised accounts or malware. Next, we can eliminate C, credential stuffing. And this involves using leaked usernames and passwords to gain unauthorized access. Now there's no indication or anything that this is happening right now. And finally, we can eliminate B, brute force. And brute force attacks involve repeated login attempts using many password combinations. Now these are automated, but brute force attacks focus on credential guessing. And that leaves us with D, DOS, which stands for denial of service. And in this specific scenario above, the threat actor misuses load testing services, which can simulate massive volumes of legitimate traffic that overwhelm or crash public-facing systems. Now, long story short, public-facing systems are flooded and things shut down or can't process the traffic correctly. Question 27. An organization relies on a workstation running Windows XP on standard consumer hardware to operate a critical internal tool. What type of system is this? A, hard-coded system. B, proprietary system. C, legacy system. Or D, obsolete platform. Okay, so the key phrases for this question here is going to be Windows XP and critical internal tool. So this is important because it indicates that the system is still active and in use, right? So we'll start off the process of elimination by eliminating A, hard-coded system. And a hard-coded system usually refers to software or configurations that can't be changed dynamically, like hard-coded credentials, as an example. Next, we can eliminate D, obsolete platform. Now, obsolete, the word obsolete here implies the system is no longer used. And the scenario clearly says it's still operating a critical tool. So it's outdated, right? But not abandoned. And finally, we can eliminate B, proprietary system. Now this would refer to vendor-specific hardware or software often custom built and tightly controlled by the manufacturer. The scenario says it's running on standard consumer hardware, which completely rules out proprietary. And that gives us the answer, which is C, legacy system. Now, a legacy system is an outdated technology that is still in active use. And the reason for this, is often due to business dependency or compatibility needs. Question 28. A security analyst is reviewing vulnerability scan results and wants to prioritize remediation based on severity. What is the scale used to assign CVSS scores? A, 1 to 10, B, 1 to 100, C, 0 to 5, or D, 0 to 10. All right, so, the key phrase for this one is just CVSS scores. Kind of hard to highlight key phrases for this one. It just requires you to know the scale to get it right, unfortunately. So let's go ahead and do the process of elimination. We can start with B, 1 to 100. This can be tricky as a lot of people confuse things like CVSS scores with a sliding percentage, but it's incorrect. Next, we can eliminate C, 0 to 5. This is not right. It's actually higher than that. And finally, we can eliminate A, 1 to 10. Now, most people are probably going to choose 1 to 10, but the CVSS score actually includes the possibility of 0, which leaves us with D, 0 to 10. Question 29. An analyst reviewing firewall rules sees both system ports and well-known ports mentioned for the same range. What is the difference between these terms? A, they are reserved for commonly used protocols. B, system ports are dynamically assigned by the host. C, system ports are less secure by default. Or D, they are the same. All right, so this is a tricky one, okay? Let's go ahead and go through it together. The key phrase is the question, right? What is the difference between these terms? So let's go ahead and do the process of elimination. We can start with B. System ports are dynamically assigned by the host. Now, this is incorrect. Dynamically assigned ports are what we call in IT temporary ports. And they usually, but they're not always, I want to mention, they usually fall from port, I want to say it's 49,152 to port 65,525. Next, we can eliminate C. System ports are less secure by default. Now, port security depends on the services listening on them, and more importantly, how those services are configured. And finally, we can eliminate A. They are reserved for commonly used protocols. Now, this is technically true. This applies to both system ports and well-known ports. However, it doesn't clarify if the two terms differ, right? It describes what they're used for. And that leaves us with D. They are the same. Both system ports and well-known ports, it refers to port 0 through 1023. Those are the common ports. And these terms are used interchangeably across various documentation in different platforms, but they are the same. Question 30, last one. A security engineer is performing a fuzz test on a custom web application to uncover unexpected behaviors. Which of the following actions are likely to occur during this test? Select all that apply. A, source code scanning. B, attempting unexpected input types. C, submitting unpredictable data to the API. Or D, sending malformed requests to the compiler. Okay, another multiple answer question. The key phrase for this one is fuzz test. And I would also say uncover unexpected behaviors. So let's go ahead and start off the process of elimination, and we can start it by getting rid of A, source code scanning. And in InfoSec, we call this static analysis, not fuzz testing. Next, we can eliminate D, sending malformed requests to the compiler. Now, this describes a compile time issue, but fuzzing is about testing runtime input handling, which, I guess gave us the two answers there, right? Which is attempting unexpected input types, and C, submitting unpredictable data to the API. Both of these align with the purpose of fuzz testing, which is to provoke errors and identify weaknesses in things like input handling. That wraps up this exam. Let me know how you did, or if there's any areas where you're struggling. And also, if you like these types of videos, I also cover Security Plus and Network Plus, and soon to be Pen Test Plus. And like always, thanks for watching, good luck and have fun.